Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Flynn. I'm just going to, I think, wait a few more minutes in case we get an additional number of people who may come to join this panel. All right, I think maybe it's time we get started. If we could maybe begin with introductions. I think we're a smaller group here. It'd be nice to get to know everyone briefly and where they come from. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Matthew Flynn. I'm a professor of international studies at Georgia Southern University. My training is in sociology, and I've done a lot of work on access to medicines, healthcare systems, especially in Brazil. I've written about the HIV/AIDS program there and the politics about breaking patents in Brazil. I've also done some other stuff of the internet and health, and also some issues related to immigration. So I want to thank you all for coming and joining this panel. This is actually the first time I've been in this conference. I've never been there in person. And this is actually the first time I've been presenting virtually. So please be patient with me. So I want to thank you all for joining this panel. And I wasn't also all that clear about the format. I just submitted what I thought was a paper for a panel, and didn't know that I actually had to put the whole panel in session together, and there's a lot of sort of last minute. So either way, I want to thank you all for joining. And if you could just introduce yourself briefly, that would be helpful for me, and we can get to know each other. Or if you want to introduce yourselves on the chat, that could also work. Everyone's hearing me, correct? I believe so. Is if this panel is, if everyone's main language is Spanish or Portuguese, I could speak in one of those languages. Okay, I guess the 15 participants right now. So I will continue speaking in English if there's, but I can take questions and was I muted? And and most recently, so they're sort of seen as a, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is my voice good? Is my voice there now? I think I was muted there for a second. ¿Me escuchas ahora? ¿Me oyes? ¿Me oyes? ¿Está todo bien? Okay, thank you. So I was talking about remdesivir and the sort of the background of the drug, and it's sort of been a repurposed drug that had failed other tests, other treatments for treating, such as, for example, Ebola, but it did show some efficacy, in vitro efficacy, against previous coronaviruses, such as MERS and SARS. And so Gilead had actually taken out a patent on it in 2019. And when COVID-19 hit, it seemed like it was well positioned to be one of the potential drugs. More sort of clinical trials as part of the WHO Solidarity trial to assess the efficacy of it. And one important clinical study showed that it reduced hospitalization times for COVID-19 patients from 15 to 11 days. Subsequent to that, there had been pressures to lower the price. Gilead had initially priced the drug at $3,120 for a 5-day treatment course in the US. There are different discounts, whether or not it's going to government procurement, such as Veterans Affairs. And then for other countries, it has put the price at $2,340 for other developed countries. In this in our study, we're interested in, so how are certain hegemonic ideologies regarding contemporary capitalist norms challenged or upheld on digital platforms? You know, right now we do live in a very digital age. We live in the age of Zoom. So it's interesting to see sort of public commentary, almost sort of like face groups in a sense, to see how issues such as pricing are perceived. And we were looking at, so what are the public perceptions about the role of pharmaceutical companies in determining the price of new drug therapies? So how does the different audiences sort of perceive the different sort of morality and legitimacy of private industry's control over these sort of essential resources, such as essential medicines? How are they sort of seen overall? In terms of our sort of theoretical background, we sort of look at coming from our sociological training and familiar with theories, we were looking at the role of Gramsci and the social construction of markets. Here we take our cues from some of the work by Forsyth and Healy, who talk about the moral views of markets. So markets are not just sort of in the way that economists might see them as sort of, you know, just have demand and supply curves that people seeking out their own particular interests, but rather that they are saturated with culture. They are saturated with different views of what we consider to be right and wrong. And also with that is sort of the cultural political economy view of Bob Jessup and other sociologists who has incorporated, coming from a sort of Marxian angle, but also including different perspectives of semiotics and looking at sort of the science and interpretation of the economy in general. Once again, there's a sort of cultural turn in terms of influencing how markets sort of operate. We're also influenced by some of the work of Leslie Sclair, William Robinson, who talk about the theory of global capitalism. This is sort of a global view of looking how capitalism operates today based on transnational capitalist classes, the prominent role of transnational corporations as sort of being the main institutional backdrop for transnational classes to operate, and the different institutions at the transnational level, such as the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. In this way, the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property, plays a key role establishing a common institutional backdrop of patent protections for intellectual property that provides monopolies for pharmaceutical companies to establish to have retained control and price over essential medicines. There is, you know, lots of government policies for governments to intervene, such as issuing compulsory licenses. And I've written about this quite a bit in the past, especially the case of Brazil's AIDS program. And there you see, you know, there's a lot of public pressure, a lot of sort of social activist pressure for governments to issue policies to better control the price of medicines. And one main one about that is sort of the compulsory licenses. And most recently, my co-author and I, Eric Silver, have looked at the case of sofosbuvir in Brazil and activists' efforts to force the government to issue a compulsory license to drive down the price of sofosbuvir that was marketed by Gilead. And once again, looking at sort of the cultural dynamics and discussions and online forum. My colleague comes a lot from the symbolic interactions field of Goffman that emphasizes the role of stigma. And this is, you can see there's additional others who work in terms of social movements who emphasize this sort of the cultural role of social movements to frame issues in order to get adherents to join their cause, in order to mobilize people. And so we sort of look at the role of stigma, especially, you know, the view that sort of big pharma is viewed in a very stigmatizing light. And so what is sort of affecting that, or to what degree is that the case, is sort of one of the things that we are sort of considering in terms of informing our sort of view on this topic. So what we did is that using sort of US Newsstream and Procrest and Reddit, we were able to download and search for a number of different articles that mentioned remdesivir and price, especially in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And from these different search engines, we could download commentaries, all these sort of debates that occur online. And we did that from the time that Gilead announced the price of remdesivir at the end of June to about September 28th. And we could sort of see all the different public discussions about remdesivir in the public sphere. So this is ultimately sort of a public understanding of the legitimacy, of the moral legitimacy of Gilead's pricing of this drug that shows a bit of efficacy for treating COVID-19. And we brought these into in vivo software. We did initial code looking at sort of how many views are there, sort of anti-pharmaceutical perspectives and frames are there against sort of big pharma. And then the other hand, seeing how many sort of frames and posts there are supporting the private pharmaceutical industry, just as sort of like a first cut. And then after that, we went in and delved more deeply in seeing, okay, what are the most dominant themes, issues, and topics that people are debating that they sort of express in terms of the issues that they see regarding Gilead's announcement of price here. In terms of the sort of the basic sort of quantitative analysis, and this is just an initial study, we're still going over the data, but in terms of our initial cut looking at this data of, for example, 720 posts that we went over, we found that, you know, the majority was 59% of these 720 posts took a very explicit sort of anti-pharma or anti-Gilead frame, such as these expressions is, this is why we hate both, they're trying to say, pharma and politicians, and they bribe. Whereas you see some pro-pharma frames, this is a quarter of the posts, tend to offer some type of support or tacit support towards the pharmaceutical industry, saying that, oh, this saves money for both patients and hospitals. It's not a high price. I sort of seen trying to justify Gilead's pricing of it. And then there are many posts that were sort of just neutral, that sort of offering or making questions about issues that they're unclear about, or just not relevant whatsoever. And they make up the difference here. And so then the next round, we try to delve in deeper into the different themes that the pro and anti views express in these online forum. And so, for example, from a pro-pharma sort of post, it says, hey, and this is a common frame that we've seen before, is that the research and development justification. And this is that, oh, Gilead spent a lot of money in clinical development in phases 1 and 3, including their early phases where they established safety profile and during which the risk of failure is high. Also, they assumed a large amount of risk by going all in and increasing production in January before they even knew it would work. If it didn't work, they would have assumed tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. And no one in government or out would have gave a shit. And so you see a lot of these, many other posts like this sort of justifying or legitimizing Gilead's pricing of this medicine. Some additional ones is, even if it's a minimum, the range is 70 million to 100 billion in terms of the cost of research and development. There's a novel drug of research and development costs about 2.6 billion per drug. Let's say it's triple the quote you just put in, 210 million. That's still less than 10% of the cost to develop this drug. And saying, oh, it takes a long time. Usually takes 10 to 20 years for a drug to develop. And they have to cover 15 to 20 other drugs that failed to reach profitability stage. And saying, oh, these high prices have to cover the costs of failure. And that's, once again, we've seen this before being presented as sort of supporting the high costs of medicines. Another common frame, and this sort of comes out from explicitly what Gilead's CEO in terms of how he justified the price. And this is, a lot of these comments, just to sort of preface here, came from comments that were of an article from the Wall Street Journal that was placed in Reddit, which is an online forum for people to have discussions where people can sort of see the article and then discuss and debate. And sort of a lot of these comments come for this one specific string. As I mentioned before, this is sort of the initial study that we've done. And so you can see, hey, a lot of the themes that are mentioned in the article will also be sort of reproduced in the comments, but it's interesting seeing, okay, which elements. And here again, in terms of the pro-farmer view is, oh, this actually, the price is not too high. It actually represents savings in healthcare resources. For example, I think if you calculate the cost of remdesivir based on value of care, it's cheaper than it should cost. The drug knocks 3 days off a hospital stay. How much is 3 days hospital stay in America worth? Probably more than $3,000. So they charge $3,000 and it's a value for that price. And so this idea of reference pricing or drugs, in terms of other studies have shown drugs tend to be priced as high as possible compared to other alternatives or substitutes. If this ends up being true, then I guess it works out. If you're in need of this drug, you've already most likely hit your deductible already, so your out-of-pocket costs will likely be $0 regardless. At least it would be on my plan. And so here, sort of viewing that, oh, it's sort of safe. We don't have to worry about the price because, you know, our insurance will be covering it. At least here in the United States, those who are having insurance will likely cover it. And there are other posts here showing that insurance companies will pay for the price of these drugs, and so it's not coming out of your top pocket, and sort of deflecting that there should be any concern with the price there. And another view, for example, there is a view from a physician saying, oh, you know, this is a very important drug because we have limited space in hospitals. So as if sort of deflecting once again actual price of the drug and saying that, hey, this is sort of needed in order to help us flatten the curve and keep the hospital ICU capacity within limits. Another pro-farmer frame is sort of like this sort of pro-capitalism or anti-government rhetoric. And here is, for example, people seem to be unaware that literally anything has a price in the system we are in. Money makes the world go round. It's sort of very sort of matter-of-fact type of view. Or because of the profit motive, most people in novel drug discovery are incentivized to go to work for the drug companies. It's rare to find a pharmacologist or biochemist doing serious drug design that wants to stay in academia. They'd be stupid to do so. So that, hey, go where the money is, and that sort of results in more innovations because that attracts talent, etc. Others say, no, I don't think the theory of free market medicine is completely evil, downplaying the negative aspects, or saying that the answer is less government, not the government sort of picking winners. So there's sort of very anti-government view that this sort of can be more of the problem. In terms of the anti-farmer views, I think the most common frame that we saw was just sort of plain out Gilead is price gouging, condemning specifically this company for its actions. For example, they charge an immensely high price for the drug, only to make profits faster, which in all due respect is disgusting. Yeah, but if you're poor and without insurance, that 4 Gs might as well be 4 billion. So you're countering what someone else said in terms of not to worry, your insurance will pay for it. And then you have a post from a hospital pharmacist saying here, who's also an academic researcher, saying not surprised at all, totally overpriced given the lack of morality. I think they're saying mortality benefit in the trial, saying, oh, this has a very limited type of beneficial effect. And actually there was a lot of discussion about the efficacy and the science and the evidence behind remdesivir in terms of treating COVID-19. And some saying, well, it reduces the hospital stay. Others saying, well, there are some trials showing that it had an effect in terms of reducing mortality rates. Others saying, no, there's a China study saying that wasn't the case. Others saying, oh, there's another drug, the anti-steroid, that seems to be better. And then some saying, well, they're both being used, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's lastly, what is the manufacturer cost of this? If they are charging $3,000 for a drug that costs $10 to make, we have a problem here. No drug should have a $3,000 markup, period. So once again, just expressing this disgust over the high price of medicines, especially above and beyond the manufacturing cost. Other main dominant theme expressed by those in the anti-pharma camp was the role of government support. And here sort of countering that claim that, oh, Gilead is mainly responsible for assuming the risk, for investing, making all the investments to bring this to market. And so you see a lot of people in these public comments mentioning the role that the federal government in the United States has provided to develop this medicine. And here's one comment saying, no, don't pretend Gilead did it by themselves. They claim to have spent $1 billion but they use government facilities, scientists, and university grant recipients along the way. Gilead didn't create the drug by themselves, but are setting themselves up to be the sole financial gainer from it. Or another one is, and the $1 billion it cost is self-reported. I'd love to see that itemized. So raising doubt about, oh no, what exactly is this cost of support? Does it go to heavy CEO salaries? Is it going to just marketing costs, et cetera? Another post says, unless things have changed drastically in the last 15 years, most major drug companies have small R&D budgets compared to marketing. Almost all the basic science and testing is done through public institutions such as universities, research institutions, and public hospitals. And I didn't include here, but there are a lot of other posts that mention, specifically mention that Gilead had received at least $70.5 million in federal grants to develop this drug, in terms of a bunch of federal monies in the basic science, in terms of develop it, in terms of different lab testing, and also in terms of funding clinical trials. And so there is and that initial figure of 70.5 billion came from Knowledge Ecology International, the consumer advocacy or patient advocacy group based in DC. That is, let me see if there's a problem here. That initially put it out there. Just have I'm mentioning that how much time we have left. The next most common frame that came up quite a bit in the anti-pharma view is that capitalism is evil. That is our for-profit healthcare system. Everything about it is wrong. Or this is why for-profit medicine is insane. How do you even calculate that value? If my life is on the line, it could cost $1 billion and I'm still going to want it, and I'm still going to want it. Or seriously, I think everyone is aware that human life has a price in our current system. That's not some little known fact. We just think that's wrong, and a system that allows for that is disgusting and should be replaced or changed. Another post is saying, you guys should be writing about your shitty overpriced healthcare. Honestly, pretty sure that kills more people than US cops. And then additional comments saying, oh man, I hope anyone on those high deductible plans does not get this and watch insurance premiums shoot up next year. Another reason we need universal health insurance was another common frame. And there are a lot of discussions too from people from all over the world, lots of comparisons between the US healthcare system and that of other companies, saying how bad the US healthcare system performs compared to places like in Canada. There's a heated discussion, it looked like, by someone from Australia with someone from the US about the merits and problems with the US healthcare system. So even though we sort of focused in terms of our data gathering and sort of this online forums based in the US, there seemed to be a very considerable degree of discussion from international participants. And so what are some of the, I guess, initial conclusions we draw from these discussions is that there's widespread but not overwhelming criticism of Gilead and the corporate pharmaceutical industry. And here the main sort of themes that I mentioned were that this price gouging is immoral, that the price that Gilead has put is wrong, that there's been significant government role in funding, that you can't be quantifying human life this way, that the US healthcare system is completely wrong, and capitalism that sort of supports it is inherently immoral. Whereas those who counter these, saying that no, that price justifies all the R&D costs, that this medicine has overall benefits in terms of saving lives. And these frames sort of differ quite a bit from when we're looking at the case of, when we looked at the case of Brazil, where we had different types of themes there, a little bit much more focused on the role of patents. And in this specific article that we looked at, there was not a lot of discussion on the role of patents. We had developed a code specifically talking about intellectual property and patents, but at least the case here, that didn't come up quite a bit. And that compared to Brazil, because we're specifically looking at the case of sofosbuvir, and there was ongoing media coverage and pressure from access to medicine advocates, such as Doctors Without Borders and others, pressuring the government to issue a compulsory license for Sevosprevir, but that wasn't sort of a dominant theme in the discussion here. So the specific role of patents and intellectual property did not come up that much in terms of the comments here. And also, because of the United States has a private sort of base health insurance scheme for its health industry, that also varied compared to Brazil, where it's largely funded by the public health system. So you have those types of differences when you compare our previous work to this one. But also, you didn't have as much sort of evils of capitalism in the view of Brazil, whereas in the United States, you had talked a lot of the evils of capitalism, whereas in Brazil, oftentimes they're sort of claiming to be the evils of imperialism, such as US imperialism, enforcing these prices on Brazil. In terms of, okay, what types of strategies seem to be sort of most relevant and pertinent, I guess, for the access to medicines movement. In this specific case, it looks like the publicizing the role of government funding of research and development seems to have been pretty effective, and it tends to resonate quite a bit with the public. One of the strings that we're looking at in terms of online comments had this very heated discussion about research and development. What is the role of Gilead? What is the role of the government in terms of that? And the article, for example, that we took most of these comments from, such as the Wall Street Journal, did not even mention the KEI's, or Knowledge Ecology International, and Public Citizens' efforts to publicize the government support in developing this drug of 70.5 million. However, there were a lot of references to that number throughout the different posts. And so that demonstrates that, hey, it has been effective in publicizing that, and people have picked up from it from other places and joined and use that in these types of discussions and trying to attack and criticize Gilead's price for this medicine. So I think, further efforts in that area will seem to be very positive in terms of the whole access to medicines movement, especially the efforts by Italy, for example. They have pressured at the World Health Organization, pushing for a resolution that pharmaceutical companies must disclose all the costs of their research and development monies that they've invested to bring a medicine to market. And also they've even passed recently resolutions in Italy itself that's saying that companies must disclose their R&D costs for new drugs, the reimbursement rates that they've had in other countries, and even the patent statuses of the drugs. So I think those efforts will continually to bear fruit. But also conversely, you can see that supporters of industry will continue to rely on these overinflated estimates saying of $2.4 billion to bring a drug to market, which have been widely criticized and debunked and based on corporate numbers that have not been disclosed to other researchers to scrutinize. And then lastly is that, pharmaceutical companies, they do face significant stigma, but they appear to retain a lot of sort of hegemonic positions, especially given the lack of policy alternatives that are being discussed in the public sphere. Obviously, this comes from sort of this initial analysis that we're looking at here. And the articles themselves have not discussed or presented different alternatives for research and developing and producing medicines. Just to give an example is, I've done studies on Brazil's role of the state-owned enterprises there that produce medicines for the public health system, and such as Pharmanguinhos by Fiocruz is one example that they produce medicines there, and it's a role that the United States could ultimately do here as well. Or there's another one in Italy, which is sort of a non-governmental organization that also does research and development similar to the efforts by the Drugs for Neglected Tropical Diseases initiative, coming out based out of Geneva, using the support from the Doctors Without Borders. And so considering these types of alternatives have not appear not to have been in the public sphere as likely. And so that could be a role in terms of showing, analyzing or sort of understanding the hegemonic position of the pharmaceutical industry. And we also have not done a complete analysis. We haven't completed our analysis yet of what is the role of, in terms of expert sort of discourse. Expert discourse being that we'd find more in editorials and op-eds. And we've looked at a couple of these and we have to finish coding, but they oftentimes have expressed that and justify, and the majority of those we believe we have to, after we finish our analysis, look to sort of support the pharmaceutical industry, sort of from eliminating the sort of overall spectrum of possibility. And this goes in terms of hegemony analysis, showing that, well, what are the alternatives being presented? How are they getting out there? And how would these sort of be received by the public? And I think that'd be a realm of further advocacy and also further analysis, sort of looking at different types of alternatives. Anyways, I will stop there and look forward to take any questions or comments or feedback that you might have. And I'm also willing to share this draft when we finish our initial draft of the paper to anyone who might be interested. Thank you. Anyone, any Q&A, feel free to post or ask in Spanish or Portuguese if you'd like. Maybe the control master could open up the chat too as well, if you could do that. Or he's also saying you could sort of raise your hand if you know how to do that. You can raise your hand using the Zoom controls if you have a question. Anyone? What about the join chat? Are we going to be using that? And there's also a menu of questions and answers. That we can use through Zoom. Anyone, any questions? I think master control, it looks like you're sending out ways to participate, but I think that might be just sent to me privately. There you go. So in terms of anyone want to, any comments, questions, suggestions? I must say I'm personally sort of impressed by all the different options here that Zoom has and the organization of interpreters too that we have. I didn't realize that. I think I can allow people to talk if you'd like to. Catherine, Lena, Luis, Pilar, Sergio. All right, should we end the session here then? I think so. If we have no comments or queries, we can just end this panel right now and just say thank you for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, please contact me at my email address. I'll put it here in the chat box. If you'd like a copy of the presentation of the work that we're doing. All right, well, thank you to all the interpreters and for the master control for organizing this.